All right, welcome everybody. We are starting today with book 9 of the Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Discourse 20. So today is going to be the last of these genealogical days, going through the long lines of the kings of the solar and lunar dynasties. I think we're going to get through the last of it today. Discourse 20 is on the posterity of Puru and the stories of Dushyanta and Bharata. Sri Shuka resumed, having been going through the Somavanshi, or the lunar line. I shall give a detailed account of the line of Puru, in which you were born, O scion of Bharata. He's addressing, of course, Parikshit. And in which many Rajarishis and Brahmanas, each propagating his line, appeared. Now, Janamejaya was born of Puru. This is not the Janamejaya who lived closer to Parikshit, but another king of the same name. And Janamejaya's son was Prachinvan, from whose loins appeared Pravira. From him indeed followed Namasyu, and to him was born Charupada. From his loins appeared a son named Sudyu, of whom was born Bahugava, and from him followed Samyati. His son was Ahanyati, whose son was called Raudrashva. Prateyu, Kuksheyu, Standileyu, Krateyu, Jaleyu, and Santateyu, Dharmeyu, Satyeyu, Vratyeyu, and the youngest known as Vaneyu. These 10 were the sons of Raudrashva, born of the Apsaras Ghritatchi, even as the 10 Indriyas are evolved from Prana, the chief of the 5 vital airs, the life of the microcosm. Rateyu's son was Rantibhara, who had 3 sons, Sumati, Dhruva, and Apratirata, O protector of men. Again, this Dhruva is not the famous Dhruva who we've read about, but named after him. Apratirata's son was Kanva. His son was Medhatiti, from whom originated the Brahmanas Praskanva and others. Obviously, this is a Kshatriya lineage, but from branching off of Medhatiti, some of them became Brahmanas. Sumati's son was Raibhya, and Dushyanta is held to be his son. One day, surrounded by a few bodyguards, Dushyanta, who had gone a-hunting, arrived at the hermitage of Kanva. He saw sitting there a charming damsel who was a compeer of Rama in the sense of the goddess Lakshmi, and a personification, as it were, of the enchanting potency of the Lord, and was illuminating the hermitage with her effulgence. The king instantly fell in love with her and spoke to her. Greatly rejoiced at her sight and sore stricken with love, he questioned her in soft words, gracefully smiling, his fatigue having completely disappeared. Who are you, with eyes resembling the petals of a lotus? Whose daughter are you, O charming one? And what is the purpose of your staying in this lovely forest? I clearly perceive you to be the daughter of a Kshatriya, O pretty one, for nowhere does the mind of the scions of Puru find delight in unrighteousness. In other words, he's kind of perhaps wishfully saying that she must be someone fit to marry him if he is attracted to her. Shakuntala replied, certainly I am the daughter of Vishvamitra, forsaken by Menaka in the forest. So that refers to a whole story which we haven't told here, but the sage Vishvamitra, who was indeed of Kshatriya birth, though he became a Brahmana, had a long love affair with the Apsaras Menaka, and eventually they parted ways, but Menaka was pregnant and gave birth to the half Apsara, half human child, Shakuntala, who she did not want to raise, so she dropped off Shakuntala at this forest ashram to be brought up by the sages here. Oh, somebody's just joining. We're in chapter 20, book 9, chapter 20. The worshipful sage Kanva knows this. What may we do for you, O hero? Have your seat, O lotus-eyed one, and indeed let our hospitality be accepted. There is enough wild rice, which may kindly be partaken of, and stay here if it pleases you. You can tell how common a compliment lotus-eyed is, that they both just casually use it for each other. Dushyanta replied, "What you say is quite becoming of you, born in the line of Kushika, a beautiful one. For princesses choose a suitable partner by themselves." The king, who knew what was enjoined at a particular time and place, married, consistently with the ethical code, Shakuntala, who had expressed her consent according to the Gandharva system. The Gandharva system of marriage just means two people consent to marry and consummate the marriage by having sex in the woods. There's no further ritual. No one else is involved. There's no wedding. So they marry by the Gandharva mode. The Raja Rishi, who was possessed of unfailing procreative energy, deposited his seed in the womb of his wedded wife, Shakuntala. The next morning, he went back to his capital and left her there. And in course of time, she gave birth to a son. The sage Kanva performed the appropriate purificatory rites relating to the newborn prince, from the Jata Karma Sanskara and so on, in the forest, basically acting as the boy's surrogate father, since his real father abandoned Shakuntala and doesn't even know that he has a son. While yet an infant, he used to play with lions, binding them with his superior strength. He is, after all, not wholly human, since his mother is only half human. Shakuntala, that jewel among women, sought the presence of her royal husband, the Emperor Dushyanta, taking along with her that boy of formidable prowess, born with a minute ray of the divine essence of Sri Hari. So he is an extremely minor avatar. When the king Dushyanta did not accept Shakuntala as his wife and her son, who were both irreproachable, meaning completely blameless, their claim is true, he's the one who's being dishonest. An ethereal voice in the heavens spoke, all living beings listening. Mother is but a leathern bag. The son belongs to his father. Nay, he is the same as his father. In other words, the meaning that this is meant in, particularly in context in the Mahabharata, where this story is told in greater length, is reproaching the father for refusing to acknowledge both the mother and the child. Therefore, O Dushyanta, have your son and do not spurn Shakuntala, your wedded wife. A son who procreates and thus propagates his line leads out of the abode of Yama, O ruler among men, by carrying on the Pitri Sraddha. Shakuntala truly says that you are the procreator of this child. So there's the most famous version of this story is not the Shastric version. It's the version in by the playwright Kalidasa, where there's a whole curse of forgetfulness and an enchanted ring and all of this. None of that appears in the Shastras. It's a kind of famous ancient Indian fictional play based on this. The full version of this story, Shastrically speaking, is in the Mahabharata. And it's quite different from the version that most people know, that was popularized by the playwright. And this is a very brief little summary of the Mahabharata version. After his father's death, Bharata too became a universal monarch of great renown. The glory of the said monarch, born with a ray of Sri Hari, is sung on earth even to this day, and indeed, even to this day, India is named after him, Bharata. He bore the mark of a discus in his right palm and that of a lotus bud on the soles of both his feet. Having been duly installed on the throne after being consecrated by means of a grand religious bath as part of the Rajasuya Yajna, the powerful emperor performed as many as 55 horse sacrifices on the banks of the holy Ganga in order of sequence, meaning along the Ganga, starting at Gangotri and proceeding down toward the mouth of the Ganga at the ocean. And 78 sacrifices, or literally what it says is he tied 78 holy horses along the Yamuna in the same order, again from Yamunotri toward Prayaga, choosing Dirghatama, the son of Mamata, as his priest, and freely giving ample wealth. The sacrificial fire of Bharata, the son of Dushyanta, was set up on an exceedingly excellent and most sacred site, where 1,000 Brahmanas divided among themselves cows gifted by Bharata, each getting as his share a badva, a large division of cows. Having thus performed 133 horse sacrifices, or as the text literally says, having tied to the sacrificial post 133 horses, to the great wonder of other kings, Bharata, the son of Dushyanta, not only overcame the Lord's Maya, but also attained to the Lord Sri Hari, the adored of the gods. In the sacrificial function called Mashnara, Bharata gave away to the Brahmanas 14 lakhs of dark elephants of excellent breed with white tusks, all adorned with gold. Neither did kings that have gone by, nor will future kings, emulate the great example of Bharata, any more than one can touch heaven with one's hands. In the course of his conquest of the four quarters, he crushed all the Kiratas, Hunas, Yavanas, Andhras, Kankas, Kashas, Shakas, and Mlechas. These are various barbarian tribal peoples on the outskirts of society, frequently like raiders and ambushers of travelers and the like, as well as kings who despised the Brahmanas and the Vedas. He further recovered wives of devas that had been carried away to Rasatala, the sixth netherworld loka, going down from the top, by the demons who, having conquered the devas in the past, had occupied various parts of Rasatala. During Bharata's reign, heaven as well as the earth yielded to his subjects all the objects of their desire. In this way, he held sway in all the four quarters for thrice 9 millenniums, or in other words, for 27,000 years. Realizing his sovereignty that had carried his fame even to the guardians of the spheres, imperial fortune, his authority, which was unobstructed everywhere, and even his life itself to be unreal, the aforesaid emperor, at the conclusion of his 27,000-year reign, withdrew himself from the world, and, as we were told, attained moksha. Bharata had 3 beloved wives, all of them daughters of the king of Vidarbha, a protector of men. They disposed of their own sons for fear of being forsaken by their husband, because it was remarked by him that the sons were not after him. In other words, that he thought that someone else was the father of all 3. On his race being thus threatened with extinction, the Maruts, the wind gods, handed over a son, Bharadvaja by name, to the emperor, who was propitiating the Maruts through a yajna known by the name of the Marutstoma yajna. Proceeding to copulate with his brother's wife, Mamata, who was already pregnant, Brahaspati forcibly discharged his seed, cursing the fetus by which he was stopped. This is a complicated story, as you can tell, which is not told in full detail here. There's other scriptures that go more into all of these, but a little footnote here explains that this resulted firstly in the child in the womb, afterwards named Dhirgatama, becoming blind, and the second being born prematurely. It's a complicated lineage of a couple of these children. Addressing Mamata as well as Brahaspati, who was inclined to abandon the child, terribly afraid as she was of being forsaken by her husband Utatya, the gods uttered the following couplet, explaining the etymology of the child's name. O foolish one, nourish this child born of 2. And in other words, don't abandon the child, despite the fact that there is a dispute over the father. And Mamata replied, O Brahaspati, nourish this child yourself, born as it is of us 2. Since having spoken thus, the father and mother went away, leaving the child. Hence, this child is named Bharadvaja. So this is a play on words that makes sense in Sanskrit. It's rather complicated, but it's to explain the name Bharadvaja. Though urged by the gods in this way, Mamata as well as Brahaspati abandoned their son Bharadvaja, regarding him as useless. The Maruts brought him up. So this explains how the Maruts came into possession of this divine child, Bharadvaja, who they adopted after his parents abandoned him. And when the Emperor Bharata, who had no children of his own, performed the Marutstoma Yagna, the Maruts gave him their child, Bharadvaja, handed him over to Bharata, on the latter's line being threatened with extinction. So technically his bloodline did go extinct, but he adopted the divine child Bharadvaja as his heir. Thus ends the 20th discourse in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sangita. Discourse 21, Sri Shuka resumed, the son of Vitata, another name of Bharadvaja, was Manu, of whom were born Brhatkshatra, Jaya, Mahavirya, Nara, and Garga, and Nara's son was Sankrati. Sankrati's sons were Guru and Rantideva, O delight of Pandu. The glory of Rantideva is, as a matter of fact, sung both in this world and the world beyond. In the case of Rantideva, who subsisted on whatever was obtained without any effort, and who, though feeling hungry himself, gave away all that was got, and was thus rendered utterly destitute, having no provision even for the evening, much less for the next day, and therefore suffering terrible hardship, along with his family, who were reduced to great straits, trembling due to excessive hunger and thirst, yet calm, passed not less than 48 days, so the tradition goes, without his taking even water. In the morning of the 49th day, there came to him by chance ghee, rice cooked in milk with sugar, samyava, which is a kind of porridge made of wheat flour with ghee and milk, as well as water. And when he was intending to partake of it, there arrived at that very time a newcomer in the person of a Brahmana. Viewing Sri Hari everywhere, and therefore full of reverence, Rantideva welcomed him and gave him a proportionate share of those dishes, and the Brahmana went away after taking that food. In the meantime, O ruler of the earth, while he was going to eat, having divided the remaining fare among themselves, yet another stranger came. Remembering Sri Hari, he gave away to the newcomer, who was a Shudra, a share of the food already divided among themselves. When the Shudra had left, there came to him another stranger surrounded by dogs. He said, O king, let food be given to me, seized as I am with hunger along with my followers, these dogs. Receiving the newcomer kindly, the king gave away with great reverence whatever was left to the dogs, as well as to their master, and bowed to them as so many manifestations of the Lord. There was but some water left, which was barely sufficient to slake the thirst of only one individual. When he was about to drink it, there unexpectedly came a Chandala, saying, please give the water to me, an unlucky fellow. Hearing that pitiful request, uttered with great effort due to exhaustion, the king, who was sore stricken with pity, spoke the following nectar-like words. I do not seek from the Lord the highest position attended with the eightfold yogic siddhis, or even the final moksha and the cessation of rebirth. Dwelling in their heart as the sufferer, I would rather undergo the suffering of all embodied souls, so that, through such vicarious suffering of mine, they may be relieved of misery. In other words, I would rather experience their suffering instead of them having to experience it. My exhaustion due to hunger and thirst, the weariness of my limbs, low spirits, languor, grief, despondency, and infatuation have all disappeared on account of my giving away the water, which meant life to this miserable fellow, anxious to survive. Having expressed such noble sentiments, the king, who was full of fortitude and merciful by nature, gave the water to the Chandala, though himself dying of thirst. The lords of the three spheres, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, who bestow rewards on those who seek them and who had appeared in three illusory forms, Brahma in the form of the Brahmana, Vishnu in the form of the Shudra, and Shiva in the form of a Chandala, created by Lord Vishnu in order to test the fortitude of Rantideva, now revealed themselves in their own form in Rantideva's presence. Greeting them all, Rantideva, who was entirely free from attachment and whose craving had altogether ceased, simply fixed his mind on Lord Vasudeva with great devotion and did not ask anything of them, even though offered a boon. Maya, the Lord's deluding potency, consisting of the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, dissolved like a dream into its own source, the spirit, O king, in the case of Rantideva, who concentrated his mind on God and sought no other boon from him than devotion to his feet. By virtue of their close association with him, all that followed in the footsteps of Rantideva became yogis exclusively devoted to Lord Narayana. From the loins of Garga, his elder brother, sprang up Shini, of whom was born Gargya. From him, indeed, even though he was a Kshatriya, started a line of Brahmanas. From Mahavirya appeared Durittakshaya, whose sons were Trayaruni, Kavi, and Pushkararuni, who attained to Brahmanhood, though born in the line of Kshatriyas. Brahatkshatra's son was Hasti, by whom was built the city of Hastinapura, the city of Hasti. We are, so there's somebody's asking, we are in book 9, Discourse 21, is where this story occurs. So Hasti built the city of Hastinapura. Hasti's sons were Ajamidha, Dvimidha, and Purumidha. Priyamedha and other Brahmanas were the progeny of Ajamidha. So repeatedly from this line, many of the Kshatriyas become Brahmanas. From Ajamidha sprang up another son, Brahadishu, whose son was Brahadhanva. Of the latter was born Brahatkaya, whose son was Jayadratha. His son was Vishadha, to whom was born in course of time Senajit, Ruchirashva, Dridhahanu, Kashya, and Vatsa were the 4 sons of Senajit. Ruchirashva's son was Para, whose son was Pratusena. There was another son of Para, Nipa by name, who had no less than 100 sons. Through Kritvi, the daughter of Shuka, Nipa begot another son, Brahmadatta. There's a footnote here explaining that although Shuka, the son of Veda Vyasa, the current speaker in the text, renounced his father's home even without being invested with the sacred thread and remained a celibate ever afterwards, he is said to have left for the solace of his disconsolate father a shadow form of his, known by the name of Chaya Shuka or Shadow Shuka, who lived as a householder and begot children, including the daughter Kritvi, who married King Nipa and begot the son Brahmadatta. The latter, who was a yogi, begot through his wife Go, who was an avatar of the goddess Saraswati, a son Vishvaksena. And indeed, her wife Go just means cow. Inspired by the teachings of Jaigishavya, it is said, he produced a work on yoga. Like he authored a yoga shastra, the Vishvaksena Yoga Shastra. From Vishvaksena sprang up Udaksvana, and from him followed Bhallada. These are the descendants of Brahadishu. Dvimidha's son was Yavinara, whose son is remembered by the name of Kritiman. His son was Satyadhriti by name, whose son Dridhanemi begot Suparshva. From Suparshva followed Sumati, whose son was Sanattiman. From the latter appeared Kriti, who, having received instruction in yoga from Hiranyanabha, his guru Hiranyanabha, taught separately, indeed, the 6 Sanghitas known as the Pratyasamas, the 6 Pratyasama Sanghitas on yoga. His son, to be sure, was Nipa, from whom followed Ugrayudha. His son was Kshemya, of whom was born Suvira, whose son was Ripunjaya. From the latter appeared a son named Bahurata. Dvimidha's younger brother Purumidha remained issueless, had no children. Ajamidha's son, through his second wife Nalini, was Nila, of whom was born a son, Shanti by name. Shanti's son was Sushanti, and Sushanti's son was Puruja, of whom was born Arka. His son was Bharmyasva, who had 5 sons, Mudgala, Yavinara, Brahadishu, Kampilya, and Sanjaya. Bharmyasva said, "These 5 sons of mine are competent enough to protect 5 lands." Hence they were known as the Panchalas. From Mudgala sprang up a line of Brahmanas called the Maudgalyas, the Maudgalya Brahmana Gotra. From Mudgala, they were the Maudgalya Brahmana Gotra were famous Ganapatyas. They were the main gurus of the Ganapatya Sampradaya. And there is an entire Upapurana, the Mudgala Mudgala Upapurana, which they were the keepers of in their lineage, keeping a lot of the rites of Ganesha Puja and the 32 forms of Ganapati and a whole branch of learning that they kept. From Mudgala, son of Bharmyasva, appeared a pair of twins, a son and a daughter, of whom the male was named Divodasa and the girl became known as Ahalya. Of the latter, through the sage Gautama, her husband, was born Shatananda. And this is the famous Ahalya of Ramayana fame, though we don't get into her story here. His son Satyadhriti was an adept in archery. His son was Sharadvan, so called because his seed, it is said, fell at the site of Urvashi on a clump of reeds. In other words, he spilled his semen because he was so attracted was he to the Apsaras Urvashi on a clump of reeds, and the reeds, the Sanskrit term for the type of reeds is sharas. The seed assumed the form of a blessed pear. Seeing that pear, King Shantanu, who was wandering in pursuit of game, picked it up out of compassion. Another pair of twins, a boy and a girl. The boy came to be known as Kripa, the guru of the Kauravas, Kripacharya, and the girl Kripi, who later on became Dronacharya's wife. Thus ends the 21st discourse in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And Discourse 22 has the genealogy of the Panchalas, the Kurus, and the kings of Magadha. Sri Shuka resumed. From Divodasa appeared Mitreyu, and his sons, or protector of men, were Chyavana, Sudasa, Sahadeva, and Somaka, the father of Jantu. In fact, Somaka had 100 sons, of whom Prashata was the youngest. His son was Drupada, whose sons were Drishtadyumna and others, while Draupadi was his daughter. This is Draupadi, the Pandava's wife. We're getting right into the Mahabharata lineage here. From Drishtadyumna appeared Drishtaketu. These are the scions of Bharmyasva, also known as the Panchalas. From Riksha, who was another son of Ajamidha, appeared Samvarana. From his loins appeared through Tapati, a daughter of the sun god, was his wife, Kuru, the lord of Kurukshetra. Kurukshetra, in fact, just meaning the field of Kuru. Parikshit, Sudhanva, Jahnu, and Nishadhashva were the sons of Kuru. Sudhanva's son was Suhotra, from whom followed Chyavana, and of Chyavana was born Kriti. His son was Uparicaravasu, of whom were born Brahadrata and others. Of them, Kushamba, Matsya, Pratyagra, Chedipa, and others were the rulers of the kingdom of Chedi. From Brahadrata sprang up Kushagra. His son was Rishabha. Of the latter was born a son Satyahita, whose son was Pushpavan, and the son of the last named was Jahu. From Brahadrata through another wife appeared two halves of a human child, a child who was born cut into two pieces. They were thrown away by the mother because they were dead, and were joined together by a Rakshasi named Jara, uttering the words live, live. So she put these two halves of a baby together and brought it back to life. And thus there appeared a son, Jarasandha, which literally means united by Jara. Of him was born Sahadeva, and from Sahadeva, not the Pandava Sahadeva, but another Sahadeva, appeared Somapi, from whom appeared Srutasrava. Of the four sons of Kuru, Parikshit, the eldest, remained issueless, after whom our Parikshit is named, while Jahu's son was named Surata. From the loins of the latter sprang up Vidurata, of whom Sarvabhauma was born, and from Sarvabhauma followed Jayasena, whose son was Radhika, and from the last name indeed appeared Ayuta. From Ayuta again sprang up Krodhana, of whom was born Devatiti, and his son was Rishya. The son of Rishya was Dilipa, whose son again was Pratipa. Devapi, Shantanu, and Bahlika, these were the sons of Pratipa. Relinquishing his claim to the ancestral kingdom, Devapi, for his part, retired to the forest, and hence his younger brother Shantanu, who was called by the name of Mahabhisha in his previous birth. Mahabhisha was a great physician, one of the great masters of Ayurveda, became the king. Even in that life, he maintained his Ayu Siddhi from his last life Whatever old man he touched with his hands would regain his youth and also experience great relief. He was famous, Mahabhisha, as being the greatest master of Kaya Kalpa. He invented the methods of Kaya Kalpa that have been practiced in Ayurveda since that time. Mahabhisha did. And that's why he had the Kaya Kalpa Siddhi that he could do just by touch, even in his following birth. Through this act of his, he came to be known as Shantanu, which literally means affording relief to one's body. Once upon a time, when Indra did not send down showers of rain in his kingdom for a period of 12 years, Shantanu, on approaching and seeking the advice of Brahmanas, was replied to by the Brahmanas as follows: he too, who like you enjoys sovereignty first in the presence of his elder brother, falls under the category of pariveta. Quoting this, the Smriti, which says, he who marries or installs the sacred fire, offering oblations to it thrice every day, before an elder brother, should be recognized as a pariveta, and the elder brother so ignored should be called a parivitti. So in other words, it's displeasing to the devas that he took the throne even though he had an elder brother. Hence, return the kingdom at once to your elder brother Devapi for the prosperity of the city as well as the state, which depends on a good rainfall, which has been obstructed due to Indra's displeasure. Thus exhorted by the Brahmanas, Shantanu approached his elder brother, who lived in the forest, and tried to persuade his elder brother Devapi to accept the throne. Having already been led away from the path of the Vedas by Brahmanas sent to him in advance by Shantanu's minister Ashmarata through their speech, expressing heretical views, Devapi, however, spoke words blaspheming the teachings of the Vedas. It is then that the god of rain released showers, because Devapi now became disqualified for the throne, and thus Shantanu became the rightful heir in Indra's eyes. Devapi, who was eventually disillusioned of the false teachings that he had been following, took to the practice of yoga and took up his abode in Kalapagrama, where it is said he is still residing as one of the immortal Chiranjeevis. When the lunar dynasty gets extinct in Kali Yuga, he, Devapi, will revive it at the dawn of Satya Yuga. And so he lives there to this day, it is said. From Bahlika, Shantanu's younger brother, appeared Somadutta, from whom followed Bhuri, Bhurisrava, and Shala. Shantanu's son by the goddess Ganga was Bhishma, a man of perfect self-control, the foremost among those who knew what is right, a great devotee of the Lord, and he became spiritually enlightened. He was a recognized leader of troops of heroes by whom even Parashurama, his own guru, the world-renowned warrior, was pleased in battle. From the loins of Shantanu through his other wife, Satyavati, the foster daughter of a chief of ferrymen, or boat people, appeared a son, Chitrangada, and also a younger son, Vichitravirya. So this is right into the immediate parentage of the Pandavas. So the Mahabharata, of course, goes into much more detail about the detailed lives, chapters and chapters, and the lives of all of these people. But here, Shuka just kind of goes through it, especially because he's talking to Parikshit, their immediate descendant. So he's talking about people Parikshit knew. So evidently, he assumes he doesn't have to go into detail about who they were. Chitrangada was killed in battle while still unmarried by a Gandharva. Through the same Satyavati, before she was married to Shantanu, appeared from the loins of Parashara a ray of Srihari himself in the person of the sage Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa, by whom the Vedas have been duly preserved by dividing it into four, the Rik, Yaju, Sama, and Atharva, and from whom I learnt this Srimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, which I am reciting to you. In preference to his own pupils, Paila and others, the divine Badarayana, another name of Vyasa, taught this supremely esoteric poem, embodying the quintessence of all the Vedas and Itihasas, to me, his son, tranquil by nature as I was, and thus fit to receive it. Now, Vichitravirya married Ambika and Ambalika, the two daughters of the king of Kashi, both of whom were carried away by force from the gathering of princes convened by their father to give them an opportunity to elect their husband. With his heart strongly attached to them, Vichitravirya was caught in the grip of phthisis and died very young. Enjoined by the mother Satyavati, the sage Badarayana begot through the wives of his half-brother Vichitravirya, Dhritarashtra and Pandu, the former through Ambika and the latter through Ambalika, as well as Vidura through a maidservant. 100 sons were born to Dhritarashtra by his wife Gandhari, a princess, so-called Gandhari because she was the princess of Gandhara, which is the modern Afghanistan, a protector of men. Of them, Duryodhana was the eldest, and there was a daughter also, Dushala by name. Through Kunti, the elder wife of Pandu, who was prevented from copulation due to a curse pronounced by a sage who had been shot dead with an arrow by Pandu while having sex with his wife in the form of a pair of deer, they having taken the bodies of deer temporarily. 3 car warriors, chariot warriors, Yudhishthira and others. He's skipping over now because he's now literally talking about Parikshit's grandparents, Bhima and Arjuna, appeared severally from the loins of Dharma, Anila, the wind god, also known as Vayu, and Indra, the lord of paradise. And through his second wife Madri appeared Nakula and Sahadeva from Nasatya and Dasra, the 2 Ashwini Kumaras. Of these 5 sons, your uncles were born one of each through Draupadi. Prativindhya was born of Yudhishthira, Srutasena from Bhimasena, who was voracious as a wolf, and Srutakirti from Arjuna. Again, Shatanika was the son of Nakula, while Sahadeva's son, Parikshit, was Srutakarma. Besides these, there were the other sons too. From the loins of Yudhishthira through his other wife, Pauravi, appeared Devaka. From Bhimasena through the Rakshasi Hidimba sprang up Ghatotkacha. And also from Bhima, through his third wife, Kali, appeared Sarvakata. And through Sahadeva, his second wife, Vijaya, the daughter of Parvata, bore Suhotra. Nakula begot Niramitra through his second wife, Karenumati, and Arjuna begot Iravan, indeed through Ulupi. Ulupi was a Nagini wife of Arjuna, and Iravan was a half Naga son. All through the daughter of the king of Manipura in Assam in northeast India, Arjuna begot Babruvahana, who, though sprung from the loins of Arjuna, was recognized as the son of his maternal grandfather because they followed a matrilineal system in Manipura. Of Subhadra, the last wife of Arjuna and the younger sister of Lord Sri Krishna, was born your father, the valiant Abhimanyu, who conquered all the Atiratas who encountered him on the battlefield. And from him, through Uttara, appeared you, O Parikshit. All the Kurus, with the exception of the 5 Pandava brothers, had perished. You too had almost been burnt with the fierce blaze of the mystic missile presided over by Brahma the Creator, released by Ashvatthama, the son of Dronacharya. But by the supreme might of Sri Krishna, you were rescued alive from the jaws of death. Here are your own sons, dear Parikshit. So it's not as though Parikshit doesn't know this, but he's finishing out the genealogy. Janamejaya and others following him. Srutasena, Bhimasena, and Ugrasena, each of them possessed of great valor. Perceiving you to have met your death through the serpent Takshaka, the said Janamejaya, full of rage, Shuka just fluently flows into prophesying the future now, having passed the present moment, will attract by means of spells and actually offer serpents as an oblation to the flames in a Sarpa Yagna, a snake sacrifice. Having conquered the entire globe on all sides and appointing Tura, the son of Kavasha, as his priest, Janamejaya, who will be celebrated as a performer of horse sacrifices, will propitiate the Lord through a number of Ashwamedha Yagnas. His son, Shatanika, will learn the 3 Vedas and receive the knowledge of rituals from the sage Yajnavalkya, and acquire knowledge of the use of missiles from Kripacharya, and will attain the highest knowledge, the knowledge of the self, from the sage Shaunaka. Keep in mind, it is the sage Shaunaka who is Shuka narrating this to Parikshit. Shatanika's son will be Sahasranika, and of him will be born Ashvamedhaja. His son again will be Asima Krishna, whose son, on the other hand, will be Nemi Chakra. On Hastinapura being washed away by a great flood of the river Ganga, he will duly settle down in the city of Kaushambi. The son sprung from his loins is called Chitrarata, and of him will be born a son named Kavirata. From him again will follow Vrishtiman, whose son Sushena, of course, will be a king. His son will be Sunita, and Sunita's son will be Nrachakshu. From him will follow Sukhinala. His son will be Pariplava, from whom will follow Sunaya, and his son will be Medhavi. Medhavi's son will be Nrapanjaya, of whom will be born Durva, and from the latter will appear Timi. Timi's son will be Brahadrata, from whom will follow Sudasa, and his son will be Shatanika. From Shatanika will appear Durdamana, whose son will be Vahinara. From Vahinara will follow Dandapani, and of Dandapani will be born Nimi, whose son Kshemaka will be a ruler of men. An account of the line of Puru, from which sprang up races of both Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, and which is esteemed by gods and rishis alike, has indeed been told by me. Having reached up to Kshemaka, this line, as a matter of fact, will come to an end with him in the Kali Yuga. Now I shall enumerate the future kings of Magadha. The son of Sahadeva, Jarasandha's son Sahadeva, will be Marjari. So this is one more branch of the line, of whom will be Srutasrava. From him will follow Ayutayu. His son again will be Niramitra, and his son will be Sunakshatra. From Sunakshatra will appear Brahatsena, and from him will follow Karmajit. Then will come Sratanjaya, and from the latter will spring up Vipra, whose son will be Shuchi. Then will come Kshema, from whom will follow Suvrata. From Suvrata will appear Dharmasutra, from whom will follow Shama. Then will appear Dyumatsena, and from Dyumatsena will follow Sumati, of whom will be born Subala. Then will come Sunita, of whom will be born Satyajit. His son will be Vishvajit, from whom will follow Rapunjaya. And the Brahadrata's line will rule for 1,000 years before coming to an end. Thus ends the 22nd discourse in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 23 is an account. An account of the posterity of Anu, Druhyu, Turvasu, and Yadu. Sri Shuka resumed. So one more branch. Sabhanara, Chakshu, and Paroksha were the three sons of Anu. From Sabhanara appeared Kalanara, and his son was Srinjaya. From him followed Janamejaya, whose son was Mahashila, and his son was Mahamana. Ushinara and Titikshu were the sons of Mahamana. Shibi, Vana, Shami, and Daksha were the four sons of Ushinara. Vrashadarbha, Suvira, Madra, and Kaikeya were the four sons of Shibi, and Titikshu's son was Rushadrata, of whom was born Hema. Then came Sutapa, whose son was Bali. Through the wife of Bali, who himself had no children, but by a different father, the wife of Bali had, through the loins of the sage Dhirgatama, 6 sons. So this is done when the father is impotent. When a king is impotent, the tradition is to have some sage impregnate the queen to continue the royal line. So this was done in this case. Indeed, it was done at least 6 times because she had 6 sons, all rulers of the earth, bearing the names of Anga, Vanga, Kalinga, Sukhma, Pundra, and Andhra. The first 3, Anga, Vanga, and Kalinga, being the foremost of them. They founded after their own names 6 principalities, all lying in the east. The kingdoms of Anga, Vanga, Kalinga, Sukhma, Pundra, and Andhra. Andhra Pradesh in India still bears that name. It's today, that's a state in India, and it has been named after this Andhra ever since this time. Of Anga, the eldest of them, was born Kanapana, from whom followed Divirata, and from Divirata followed his son Dharmarata, of whom was born Chitrarata, who had no issue, and was better known by the name of Romapada rather than his birth name, Dharmarata. To him, his friend, the celebrated king Dasharatha, the father of Lord Sri Rama, gave in adoption his own daughter Shanta. The sage Rishyasringa married her. On Indra, the god of rain withholding showers, courtesans drew to the Anga territory the sage Rishyasringa, born of a deer, by their dance and music. And he was kind of part deer. He had antlers. He was the famous deer sage. By their dance and music, both vocal and instrumental, as well as by their coquetry, loving embrace, and presents of various kinds. Conducting a sacrifice in honor of Indra, the sage also secured progeny for the issueless king Romapada. This was a specialty of this sage, Rishyasringa, doing fertility ceremonies. He did the same for Dasharatha to secure the birth of Rama and Lakshmana and Bharata and Shatrughna and their sister Shanta. And through a similar sacrifice, of course it says that right here, through a similar sacrifice conducted by him, the issueless Emperor Dasharatha too got his celebrated sons. Of Romapada was born Chaturanga, and his son was Pritulaksha. Pritulaksha's sons were Brahadrata, Brahatkarma, and Brahadbhanu. From the eldest, Brahadrata, appeared Brahanmana, the son born of whom was called Jayadrata. His son by his wife Sambhuti was Vijaya, of whom was born Dhriti. From Dhriti followed Dhritavrata, whose son was Satkarma, and from the latter appeared Adhirata. While sporting on the bank of the holy Ganga, the latter Adhirata, who was issueless, adopted as his son the baby Karna, born of Kunti, while she was still unmarried, and had been abandoned by her, enclosed in a box which she floated in the river. Prashasena was the son of the aforesaid Karna, who eventually became a king through the gift of the kingdom of Anga by Duryodhana. Again, Babhru was the son of Druhyu, and Babhru's wife was Babhru's son was Setu, of him was born Arabdha, whose son was Gandhara, and Gandhara's son was named Dharma. From him followed Dhrita, and Dhrita's son was Durmana. From Durmana appeared Pracheta. The 100 sons of Pracheta became the rulers of Mlechas and settled in the northern quarter. In other words, they left the Vedic civilization completely and became rulers of culturally totally foreign people to the north of India, like possibly as far north as like Mongolia or some region. Again, Vahni was the son of Turvasu, and Vahni's son was Bharga, from whom followed Bhanuman. His son was Tribhanu, and Tribhanu's son again was the generous-minded Karandhama. His son was Maruta, who being issueless adopted as his son Dushyanta, a scion of Puru. Longing for the imperial throne, however, the said Dushyanta reverted to his own line. In other words, left his adopted family and returned to his birth parents. Now, and that, of course, ended the line of Maruta, who had no children and whose adopted son disowned him. And so that branch ended there. Now, O jewel of men, I proceed to give an account of the posterity of Yadu, the eldest son of Yayati, one more branch, which is productive of extraordinary religious merit and capable of wiping out all the sins of men. A man is completely rid of all sins by listening to an account of Yadu's line, in which the Almighty Lord, the Supreme Spirit, took his avatarana in the semblance of a man. The reason why this line is so famous is, of course, it leads to Krishna. Sahasrajit, Kroshta, Nala, and Ripu were the 4 celebrated sons of Yadu. Of these 4, the son of the eldest was Shatajit, and Mahahaya, Venuhaya, and Haihaya were the sons of Shatajit. Haihaya's son again was Dharma, and from him followed Netra, the father of Kunti. From Kunti sprang up Sohanji. Then followed Mahishman, whose son was Bhadrasena. Durmada and Dhanaka were the sons of Bhadrasena, the latter of whom was the father of Kritavirya. Kratagni, Kritavarma, and Kratauja were the other sons of Dhanaka. Arjuna, the son of Kritavirya, became the ruler of the 7 divisions of the globe, and he further attained from Lord Dattatreya, a part manifestation of Sri Hari, proficiency in yoga, as well as great achievements in the form of the Ashtasiddhis. Surely no other kings, or literally rulers of the earth, will attain to the level of Arjuna, the son of Kritavirya, in point of sacrificial performances, munificence, asceticism, yogic power, learning, valor, victory, and so on. Indeed, for 85,000 years, he enjoyed the objects of the 6 senses, which could not be exhausted, his strength of body, mind, and senses remaining unimpaired for all that time, and his very thought proving for the people who remembered him a security against loss of wealth. Of thousands of his sons, only 5 survived in battle with Parashurama, since this was at the time when Parashurama was killing all the Kshatriyas. The 5 who survived were Jayadhvaja, Shurasena, Vrashabha, Madhu, and Urjita. From the eldest of the survivors of Parashurama's Kshatriya purge, Jayadhvaja, the eldest of Arjuna's sons, appeared Talajanga, of whom again were born 100 sons. The race of Kshatriyas, known by the name of the Talajangas, the sons of Talajanga, was exterminated by King Sagara, strengthened by the glory of the sage Aurva. The eldest of Talajanga's sons was Vitihotra, whose son was Madhu, and Madhu's son was called Vrishni. In fact, he had 100 sons, of whom Vrishni was the eldest. It was to these, Yadu, Madhu, and Vrishni, that the Yadava race owed its existence, and it was due to them that their descendants became known as into the 3 branches: the Yadavas, those descended from Yadu, the Madhavas, descended from Madhu, and the Vrishnis, descended from Vrishni. O king, the son of Kroshtu, the second son of Yadu, was Vrijinavan, of whom was born Swahi. From the latter, indeed followed Rusheku, whose son was Chitrarata, and from the latter sprang up Shashabindu, a great mystic who had extensive enjoyment and was exalted in point of virtues. He was possessed of all the 14 varieties of excellent jewels. The list of the 14 royal jewels is given in the Markandeya Mahapurana. They are the elephant, the horse, the chariot, the woman, the arrow, the treasury, the wreath of flowers, raiment, a tree, the Shakti javelin, the noose, the gem, the umbrella, and an aerial vimana, a flying chariot. The great mystic Shashabindu possessed those 14 things, ruled over the entire globe, and was invincible. Through his 10,000 wives, that exceedingly renowned emperor begot 1 billion sons. Of those sons, of whom 6 were the foremost, the number 1 foremost being Pratusrava. The son of Pratusrava was Dharma by name, whose son was Ushana, who performed 100 horse sacrifices. His son was Ruchaka, who had 5 sons. Please hear of them. They bore the names of Purujit, Rukma, Rukmeshu, Pratu, and Dhyamagha. Even though issueless, Dhyamagha, the husband of Shaibya, dared not take another woman to wife for sheer fear of his wife Shaibya. On one occasion, however, having conquered his enemies, he brought as a booty from the enemy's house a princess of the Bhoja dynasty. Observing her seated in the king's chariot, Shaibya indignantly spoke to her husband, straight in the following words: "O traitor, who is this girl made to occupy this chariot meant for me?" When the reply came, "She is your daughter-in-law," she smilingly rejoined, "I am a barren woman and have no co-wife either. How could there be a daughter-in-law to me?" The king replied, "She will prove a suitable match, O queen, for the boy whom you will bear." The Vishvedevas as well as the Pitris took pity on Dhyamaka, who was shaking and perspiring all over through fear of his wife, and heartily approved of his words, so that Queen Shaibya conceived not long afterwards through divine intervention, and gave birth to a handsome male child. He was called by the name of Vidarbha and married that chaste girl who had already been accepted as a daughter-in-law by his parents even before the birth of her husband, who was evidently much younger than her. Thus ends the 23rd discourse in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sanghitas. And we get the last discourse of Book 9, Discourse 24, an account of the posterity of Yadu, leading right up to Krishna. Sri Shuka resumed. Through Bhojya, Vidarbha begot 2 sons, Kusha and Krata by name, and a third called Romapada, who was the delight of Vidarbha's family. Romapada's son was Babru, and of Babru was born Kriti. His son was Ushika, of whom Chedi was born. And from Chedi appeared Damaghosha, and so on, a protector of men. Krata's son was Kunti, whose son was Drishti, and then came Nirvrati. From Nivrati appeared a son, Dasharha by name, whose son was Vyoma. From Vyoma followed Jimuta, and his son was Vikriti, whose son was Bhimarata. From the latter sprang up a son, Navarata, and from him followed Dasharata. Dasharata's son was Shakuni, Shakuni's son was Karambhi, and Karambhi's son was Devarata, from whom followed Devakshattra. Devakshatra's son was Madhu, and Madhu's son was Kuruvasha, of whom was born Anu. Anu's son again was Puruhotra, whose son was Ayu, and of the latter was born Satvata, Bhajamana, Bhaji, Divya, Vrishni, Devavradha, Andhaka, and Mahabhoja were the 7 sons of Satvata, O worthy king. Nimlochi, Kinkina, and even so Drishti were the sons of Bhajamana by his one wife, and Shatajit, Sahasrajit, and Ayutajit. These were the 3 sons by the other wife, O Lord. Devavradha's son was Babhru. Of these 2, father and son, Babhru and Devavradha, they recite the following 2 couplets. As we heard from a distance, so do we observe from near. Babhru is the foremost of men, while Devavradha compares with the gods. Men who attained immortality through the precepts of Babhru and Devavradha, 2 numbered 14,065. In other words, Babhru and Devavradha were great teachers of spirituality, and a total of 14,065 people attained moksha through their teachings, following those 2 gurus, who were also kings. Mahabhoja, the 7th son of Satvata, too, had given his mind to piety, and those born in his line after him came to be known after him as the Bhojas. Sumitra was the son of Vrishni, and Yudhajit, too, a chastiser of foes. Yudhajit's sons were Shini and Anamitra, and Nimna was born of Anamitra. Again, Satrajit and Prasena were born of Nimna, and Satyaka was the son of Shini, who had been shown above to be the other son of Anamitra. The son of Satyaka indeed was Yuyudhana, also known by the famous name of Satyaki, whose son was Jaya, from whom followed Kuni, and of him was born Yugandhara. Yet another son of Anamitra was Vrishni, of whom were born Svapalka and Chitrarata. From Svapalka through Gandhini were born 12 celebrated sons, Akrura being the foremost of them all. So there were 13, Akrura being the foremost, and then the 12 the younger brothers were Asanga, Sarameya, Mridura, Mriduvid, Giri, Dharmavridha, and Sukarma, Kshetropeksha, Arimardana, and Shatrugna, Gandhamada, and Pratibahu. They had a sister also bearing the name of Suchira. Again, Devavan and Upadeva were the 2 sons of Akrura. Similarly, Prithu, Vidurata, and many others were the sons of Chitrarata, the younger brother of Svapalka, all of them scions of Vrishni. Kukura, Bhajamana, Shuchi, and Kambalabarhisha were the sons of Andhaka. This is filled in a little bit from the Vishnu Purana, which it is on the authority of a passage in the Vishnu Purana that Kukura and the others have been concluded to be the sons of Andhaka, although Andhaka's name was omitted by Shukadeva here. Kukura's son was Vahni, whose son was Viloma, and from Viloma followed Kapotaroma. His son was Anu, whose friend was the famous Gandharva Tumburu, a master of music, after whom Gandharva Veda was named. Anu's son was Andhaka, of whom was born Dundhubi. Then came Aridyota, whose son was Punarvasu. The latter had a son Ahuka, as well as a daughter Ahuki. Again, Devaka and Ugrasena were the 2 sons of Ahuka. Devavan, Upadeva, Sudeva, and Devavardhana were the 4 sons of Devaka. They had 7 sisters, the eldest of whom was Dhritadeva, or protector of men. The 7 sisters, besides Dhritadeva, were Shantideva, Upadeva, Srideva, Devarakshita, Sahadeva, and Devaki. Devaki, the mother of Krishna. Vasudeva married them all. Kansa, Sunama, and Nyagrodha, Kanka and Shanku, Suhu, Rashtrapala, Srishti, and Tushtiman were the 9 sons of Ugrasena. Kansa, Kansavati, Kanka, Surabhu, and Rashtrapalika were the daughters of Ugrasena, all of them wives of Vasudeva's younger brothers, Devabhaga and the others. It was customary for these royal families to marry a lot of brothers and sisters to bind families closely together for clan purposes, as we've seen many times in these genealogies. From Vidurata, the son of Chitrarata, appeared Shura, whose son was Bhajamana. From Bhajamana followed Shini, of whom was born Swayambhoja, and Hridika was recognized as the latter's son. Devabahu, Shatadhanva, and Kritavarma were the sons of Hridika. Shura, who is often called Shurasena, was the son of Devamidha, who is known from other sources, such as the Vishnu Purana, to be the fourth son of Hridika. Shura's wife was Marisha by name. Through her, he begot 10 faultless sons: Vasudeva, Devabhaga, Devasrava, Arnaka, Sranjaya, Syamaka, Kanka, Shamika, Vatsaka, and Vrika. They call Vasudeva a fit receptacle for the avatarana of Sri Hari as Anakadundhubi, inasmuch as on the happy occasion of his birth, kettle drums and larger drums, which are called Anakas and Dundhubis, of the gods sounded from the sky. Prita, also famously called Kunti, and Srutadeva, Srutakirti, Srutasrava, and Rajadidevi. These 5 girls were the sisters of the aforesaid Vasudeva and the others. Their father, Shura, actually gave Prita in adoption to his friend Kunti, who was issueless, and so she was called Kunti after him and became the mother of the Pandavas, or of 3 of the Pandavas. From the sage Durvasa, who got highly pleased with her for her services rendered to him when he called on her father as an unexpected guest, she received a certain mantra by means of which devas can be easily invoked, and in order to test its efficacy, she invoked the lustrous sun god. Astonished in mind to behold the god arrived in her presence that very moment, she apologetically said, "The spell was employed by me for the sake of trial alone, therefore kindly return and forgive me my audacity." The sun god replied, "My darshana never goes in vain. O godly virgin, I intend to beget a son through you. I shall so arrange that your virginity is not impaired, O beautiful damsel." So saying, the sun god deposited his seed in her womb and returned to heaven. That very moment, a male child, who was another son, as it were born of her without any travail. In other words, without any pain of going through childbirth in the normal way. Afraid of the world, however, afraid of the world's judgment, she painfully consigned the child to the stream of a river. Later on, your great-grandfather Pandu, of genuine valor, duly married her. Again, Vridha Sharma, a scion of Karusha, duly espoused Srutadeva, of whom was born Dantavaktra, who was firstborn of Diti, as the demon Hiranyaksha, because he was cursed by the sages. In other words, he was the last birth of one of the Dwarapalas of Vaikunta. And Drishtaketu, the ruler of the territory of Kekaya, took Srutakirti to wife. His sons were Santardana and others, the 5 princes of Kekaya. Through Rajadhidevi, his wife Jayasena, so the tradition goes, begot Vinda and Anuvinda, who became the rulers of Avanti, while Damaghosha, the king of Chedi, accepted for his wife Srutasrava. The latter son was Shishupala, the story of whose birth has already been told. He was the other incarnation of the 2 gatekeepers, along with Dantavaktra. Chitraketu and Brahadbala were the sons of Deva Bhaga by his wife Kansa, the sister of Kansa. Suvira and Ishuman were the 2 sons of Devasrava by Kansavati, while Satyajit as well as Puruchit were born of Kanka through Anaka. Again, Sranjaya begot through Rashtrapali Vrisha, Durmarshana, and others, while Shyamaka begot through Surabhumi, Harikesha, and Hiranyaksha. Similarly, an interesting choice to name your son after the legendary demon Hiranyaksha. Similarly, Vatsaka begot through Mishrakeshi, celestial Apsaras, Vrika, and others, while Vrika begot through his wife Durvarkshi, Takshya Pushkara, Shala, and so on. Through her union with Shamika, again his wife Sudamini, bore Sumitra, Arjunapala, and others, while Kanka too, for his part, begot Ritadhama and Jaya. Pauravi, Rohini, Bhadra, Madira, Rochana, Ila, Devaki, and others, including Dhritadeva, and so on, all the sisters of Devaki, were the wives of Vasudeva, also known as Anakadundubi. Now Vasudeva begot through Rohini, Bala, Gada, Sharana, Durmada, Vipula, Dhruva, Krita, and others. Bhuta, Subhadra, and Bhadravaha, Durmada, and also Bhadra, and 7 others. These 12 indeed were the sons born of Pauravi. Similarly, Nanda, Upananda, Krataka, Shura, and so on were the sons of Madira. Bhadra, hailing from Kosala, however, brought forth only one son, the delight of his race, Keshi by name. Through Rochana, from the loins of Vasudeva, appeared Hasta, Hemangada, and others, and through Ila he begot Uruvalka and others, foremost among the Yadus. Viprashta alone appeared from the loins of Anakadundhabi through Dhritadeva, while Srama, Pratisruta and others were the sons of Shantideva, O Parikshit. Kalpavarsha and other kings, numbering 10, were the sons of Upadeva, while Vasu, Hansa, Suvansha, and 3 others were the 6 sons of Srideva. Again, 9 sons, Gada and others, were obtained by Devarakshita through Vasudeva, while he begot through Sahadeva 8 sons, the foremost of whom was Puruvisruta, as Dharma begot the 8 Vasus themselves. Further, the high-minded Vasudeva begot through Devaki 8 more sons, Kirtiman, Sushena, Bhadrasena, Bhadra, Riju, Sammardana, and Lord Sankarshana, who was an avatar of Shesha, the king of serpents. While the 8th son of the blessed Vasudeva and Devaki indeed was Lord Sri Hari himself, and the highly blessed Subhadra, your grandmother, was their daughter, O king. Whenever there is decline of virtue and growth of sin in this world, the almighty Lord Sri Hari actually manifests himself at that time. Indeed, for the appearance and actions of the all-pervading Lord Sri Hari, the absolutely unattached witness, O ruler of the earth, there is no ground other than his own will to sport. For the activity of his Maya conduces to the birth, continuance, and destruction of every embodied soul, while his grace is intended to bring self-realization through cessation of birth. Endeavoring to remove the burden of the earth, which was overrun by demons disguised as kings, who led more than one Akshauhinis, Lord Sri Krishna Madhusudhana, accompanied by his elder brother Lord Sankarshana, who became better known as Balarama, performed deeds which cannot be comprehended even in thought by the rulers of gods. In order to shower his grace on the devotees, he spread far and wide through those deeds a most sacred glory capable of driving away the sorrow, grief, and ignorance of those going to be born in the ensuing Kali Yuga. Sipping with the hollow of his joined palms in the form of his ears but once from the holiest stream of his glory, which is nectar to the ears of the righteous, a man shakes off the tendencies of karmas standing in the way of liberation. Through words sweetened by his loving smiles and glances, his valorous leelas and divine personality, charming in every limb, he brought joy to mankind, his activities being ever praised by the Bhojas, Vrishnis, Anthakas, Madhus, Shurasenas, and Dasharhas on the one hand, and by the Kurus, Ranjayas, and Pandus on the other. Drinking full of joy with their eyes, the beauty of his face rendered all the more lovely by ears adorned with crocodile-shaped earrings and lustrous cheeks, lit up with a graceful smile and ever steeped in joy. Men and women not only did not feel sated, but grew angry with Nimi. In other words, angry with the fact that they had to blink their eyes, and so even for an instant ceased to look on him. As soon as born, Sri Krishna, the Supreme Person, went to the forest dales of Raja from his father's house at Mathura, and having heightened the joy of the residents of Raja, returned to Mathura, slew enemies, married numerous wives, begot through them hundreds of sons, and worshipped his own self by means of a number of yajnas in order to popularize his own Vedic path leading to his realization. Intending to reduce the heavy burden of the earth by means of the internal discord appearing among the Kurus, he swept away by his mere glance the armies of kings on the battlefield, loudly proclaimed far and wide the victory of Vijaya, or Arjuna, in the Kurukshetra war, taught the highest truth to his beloved disciple Uddhava, and returned with an easy mind to his own divine abode. Thus ends the 24th discourse, entitled An Account of the Posterity of Yadu, forming part of an account of the solar and lunar dynasties of kings, and Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sanghita, composed by the sage Veda Vyasa and consisting of 18,000 shlokas. And that is the end of Book 9. And we can stop there for today. Next time we get to start what is almost everybody's favorite part of the Bhagavatam, or indeed of all the Puranas, because the entirety of Book 10 and 11, most of 11, are the story of Krishna's life, which we've finally gotten to in detail. So thank you all very much for coming. I know these last few genealogical days have been rather dense and are mostly lists of names of ancient kings. But it's all the Puranas lay great importance on the genealogies as one of the main subjects that they lay emphasis on. So it's kind of dense reading to wade through it, but That is the end of it.
Thank you, Devla. Haribol.
Haribol, thank you all for coming.
Quick question.
Mhm.
Arjuna, son of Kritavirya, is he the same as the Pandava?
No, it's a common name.
Right.
Yeah. It's like if there's like a King John, there's surely many King Johns. You're going to come across some of the same names many times, different Arjuna.
Right. And then what about the Arjuna that Parashuram killed?
Again, different Arjuna.
Right.
Arjuna is
Good.
a type of tree. So it would be like naming your son like Rowan, perhaps, in English. It's a fairly common name.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for coming.
And Ekadashi, I think, throughout the world on Tuesday, according to ISKCON calculations, Ekadashi is on Tuesday everywhere in the world.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Happy Ekadashi in advance.
Yes. Jai Shri Hari.
Jai Shri Hari.